Hello, my name is Mahboub. I'm a contributor to the Amagi and your host for this interview with Professor Azadeh Kian. Thank you very much, Azadeh Kian, for your time and for accepting our invitation on this short notice.
Thank you, Mahtab, for inviting me.
For many Iranians, you are a familiar face, but real quick, Azadeh Kian is a French-Iranian sociologist and one leading international scholar working on gender, politics, society in Iran, and the broader Middle East, as well as diasporic communities in the West. Azadeh is a distinguished professor of sociology and gender studies at Université Paris-Cité, and she also serves as the director of the Center for Teaching, Documentation, and Research on Feminist Studies. So you were born in Iran and left the country in 1979. You completed your MA and PhD in sociology at the University of California, where you also taught political sociology before moving to France. Since then, you have been an important voice in interdisciplinary gender studies and Middle Eastern research. Your work focuses on the relations between gender, Islam, state power, social change, and in the broader term, but especially in Iran. You have contributed to understanding women's rights movements, feminist activism, and questions of national identity. Your research highlights how gender intersects with class, ethnicity, and religion in shaping social and political inequalities and dynamics at large. You're author of influential books and many academic articles, including Secularization of Iran, A Doomed Failure, The New Middle East Class and Making of Modern Iran in 1998, and Rethinking Gender, Ethnicity, and Religion in Iran, an intersectional approach to national identity in 2023. You also have a strong public presence and frequently contribute to French media, but also you are engaged very closely with developments in feminist movements in Iran, such as the discussion around the Me Too movement more recently and the issue of presidency of women in Iran. It's a great pleasure to welcome you today and benefit from your insight about the recent developments in Iran. I would like to first ask you about your background and how you came to study and be interested in gender dynamics, but power relations at large.
Thank you very much, Mahtab. If I may, I would just like to say that I was a distinguished professor of sociology and director of CEDREF and up to November 2025, because from November onward, I'm an emerita professor, emerita distinguished professor. And also I left Iran actually in end of 1980. So I lived part of also the Iran-Iraq war after the revolution. I was there when they closed down the universities and repressed students and so on. So I left Iran in end of 1980 when I was about 20 or 21, I guess. So I came to France first because I had parts of my family in France. I studied here, then went to the States to continue my studies. Up to 1994, I couldn't go back to Iran. But then after the end of my PhD studies at UCLA, University of California, came back to France, and then I decided to go and do field work and field research in Iran, because my dissertation was on political sociology and historical sociology, but then I needed to work on the Iranian, post-revolutionary Iranian society, and for this I needed to go there and really start working with the population. So I obtained my Iranian passport and I went to Iran and started doing fieldwork there. And from 1994 up to 2008, I was doing constant fieldworks in various parts of Iran. And we also did, I was responsible for a very important national research this was the most important research ever done in post-revolutionary Iran, which comprised all Iranian provinces at the time, and we had 31,000 people in our survey. And also I did extensive also qualitative work in addition to quantitative data that we could gather from these works. So I have done a lot of field work, and a lot of my books in French, in English, are actually founded on the results of my fieldworks in Iran. Why did I study ethnicities and gender? Actually, when I was doing my studies at UCLA, my dissertation was a comparative study between Iran and Egypt from the 19th century up to 1979 in Iran. 1980 is when President Sadat in Egypt was assassinated by the Islamists. The reason was that I was working on the middle classes and the importance or political importance of the middle classes, and especially educated middle classes, in these two countries, and kind of I compared them. Then, of course, when you work on the recent contemporary histories from the 19th century onward in these two countries, what I could see was here and there mentions of women's importance, or not importance actually, but women's participation. For instance, in Egypt, 1919 revolution against the British occupation. In Iran, of course, from 1905, 1906 onwards, during the constitutional revolution. So while I was reading for my own work, dissertation, I was not working on women or gender at the time, but I came across the importance, the role, actually the important role, I should say, that women played in different social movements in these countries. And I wrote about them in my dissertation, but only very small part of my dissertation is actually regarding women's participation. But then after the end of my dissertation, after I kind of filed it, then I started really working on women and gender in Iran. And when I went back to Iran in 1994, I started working on two different projects. One was on the elite women under the Islamic Republic. That is, I, for instance, interviewed many women journalists, women members of the parliament, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I was working on rural migrants in Khak Sefid. Khak Sefid was a very poor neighborhood in eastern Tehran, which was built by these migrants, especially from Azerbaijan, and also some came from Kurdistan later on and joined. And so I was working also with women in this very poor suburb, and it is where these women actually taught me a lot. First of all, for the first time, I came to know their hardships, but also their struggles. Some of them, for instance, were had lost their husbands. Some were really struggling in this new environment, and they were very poor, but they were really, for instance, investing on the future of their kids, and so on. And also, what is funny is that I, of course, prepared my survey questionnaire in France, and when I went to Iran, this is where you could see that when you are not in the country and you are not in contact with the people, how awkward my questions were to them. And so it is these women really from this poor neighborhood who started asking me, what do you mean by these questions? And they sort of helped me to correct and to revise my question. And anyways, so I could really start talking with them. And also beforehand, I really worked on myself to take a distance with all my ideologies and so on and so forth. And when I went there and started really discussing with people, I kind of opened myself, I think, to what they were telling me and so on. So
Just quickly jumping in. So you went in at a time when the reformists were in power, more or
no,
less.
no, I went there under Rafsanjani government. 1994 was Rafsanjani government. Actually, in 1992, President Rafsanjani said that Iranians who were not involved in killing other Iranians or whatever, in military opposition, sorry, military opposition against the regime could obtain their passport and could go back to Iran. At the time, my parents were both alive and living in Iran, and really put a lot of pressure on me to go back. They wanted to see me, and also I was very much interested in doing field work in Iran. So I obtained an Iranian passport and went there, and this is under Rafsanjani. So I started really contacting also, as I mentioned, people who were at the time economic entrepreneurs, private entrepreneurs, for instance, but also a lot of, as I mentioned, various women from various categories, social categories, political also shades. For instance, I also interviewed some elite women who are historians, who are artists, who are authors, and so on and so forth. And so this gave me a kind of a broad and general understanding. Nonetheless, when I came across these rural women from Azerbaijan, especially, who are ethnic minorities, I realized that they had different understandings, and their hardships were different. And the fact that when you're an Azeri speaker and you go to Tehran and you have to learn the language, and you have to have strategies for the future of your children. It is different from Persians or Persian speakers who always lived for instance, in the capital and so on, or the middle classes, well-off middle classes, on whom I have been working. So this also helped me or encouraged me to extend my works later on other ethnic minorities, such as especially Baluch and Turkmens. But I also worked on the Hormozgan province, which is also they are not minorities, but it is a very poor province as well. And this is where I learned a lot, working with the people who are not Persian and who are not Shiite. In that matter, I call them minority. Minority in terms of they don't have the power, and that the power is in the hands, of course, of Shiites. And then I realized that the Islamic regime is not Islamic, but it is a Shiite regime. That is that even when you're Sunnite in Iran, although you're Muslim, you don't have access to the same rights as Shiites do. And when you are a woman, of course, you are considered as a second-hand citizen, and so on. So, I mean, this raised a lot of questions, and I started to work and to answer, try to answer these questions, actually answer my own questions.
So fast forward 25 years later than when you started your research, you already talked about underdevelopments, disparities in terms of class, gender, religion, minorities. How do you think now, in this recent wave of protest, the Iranian society has changed in comparison to the time when you did your research?
I was doing my research, actually, the Persians, for instance, did absolutely have no idea. I'm not talking about the regime or the, decision makers. I'm talking about the population, because every time I came back to Tehran, for instance, from my field works, I would talk with my friends, family members, with my colleagues, who were not aware of the discrimination against these my ethnic minorities. They didn't know much about what is a Baluch. For instance, Baluchis were very discriminated against in reality, but a lot of people thought that they were thieves. They were very, negative, and they were very discriminated against, but at the same time, they were stigmatized by the regime and also by many people. And for instance, at the time, what I want to say is that there was not a consciousness about how ethnic and religious minorities are being treated in Iran by the regime and also by the general population. They were living apart, and they would say, well, I mean, it's none of our kind of business. You see what I mean? No, as far as I could see. And for instance, at once I do remember I came back from Balochistan, where I had interviewed many Balochi women who would talk about their problems with me. And when I came back to Tehran, I talked about several women who had NGOs, and even the Shirin Ebadi, who was the Nobel Prize at the time, and so on, about, those issues, those problems. And I said, women should really go ahead and try to found ways to get together, you in Tehran and them in Balochistan, and so on, to kind of and nobody took me seriously. It was not their problem, and some even told me, "Look, we have still a lot of problems with the regime, and when we obtain our problems, then Baluchi women also will solve their problems." That is to say, and this is how I realized that how when you are upper middle class woman in the Persian woman in Tehran, you think that your needs are superior to the needs of others, and that first you should obtain your rights, and then it will it will have an impact on others.
So there was
So
this hierarchy, and then came Jina
absolutely,
revolution.
this is the hierarchy that they've, and then for this very reason, I think that the very important impact of when life freedom movement was that they brought all these different peoples of Iran together, because in this movement, which started in 2022 after the assassination of a young Kurdish woman, Jina Mahsa Amini, it provoked, of course, demonstrations and so on. I mean, I'm not getting into that because I think you have already made a lot of interviews on the issue, but what was very important to me is that for the first time, non Baluchis, non-Kurdish, non-Turkmens, and so on, I'm talking about Persians, kind of realized that, oh my God, yes, I mean, these parts of Iran exist. They do have problems. They are discriminated against by law. They are underdeveloped. They are, all these issues. And this was a very important movement because they brought all these people together, at least in terms of their demands. they all demanded equality, gender equality, equality between minorities and majority, equality, secularization, for instance, that is the separation between religion and state, and also democracy. This was very, very crucial moments. And I think that ever since 1906, the Constitutional Revolution, we had not have these moments before, where you had at the same times people in Kurdistan who were demonstrating and chanting the same, more or less the same slogans, and in Tehran, Isfahan, and then also in Zahedan, for instance, and so this was very important to me, and I felt that what I had seen there throughout my studies in those parts of Iran was becoming a reality, actually, because what I seen there was that despite all the shortcomings, discriminations, gender inequalities, I had seen, for instance, some women who were striving to obtain their rights within their own traditions, within their own communities. They were not rejecting their communities, but they were also being critical about the ways, for instance, they were being treated by some of their traditions. I'm not getting into that. I had, spoken about this at length in my book. But anyways, and this is where I could see that for the first time, Baluchi women were in the streets chanting slogans, demonstrating alongside the men, the Baluchi men. This was something that was not happening 10 years before. What I mean is that the scope of One Life Freedom movement is really very, very large. It has been, unfortunately, just limited to the issue of veil. But it's not just veil. And for instance, Baluchi women who demonstrated still were veiled, but they came out of their homes and they were chanting slogans and they were demanding the rights, and they were going against, of course, the Islamic regime that is a discriminatory, as you know, repressive and dictatorial and corrupt regime. So these are very important moments in Iran's contemporary history. And I think that not enough works have been done yet on the importance of women life freedom movement and the impact that it had on the general population.
So here comes my next question. From that very glorious moment, as you described, where there was this really huge number of people with this very progressive slogan of women, life, freedom on the street. And now we are seeing demonstrations and protests in December 2025 and January 2026, and the massacre of the protesters in Iran. The slogans have changed. I think the way the protest is shaping has changed. Do you see a continuity, or do you see a rupture, or how do you think that the society has developed and the way that it is protesting has developed in the past 3 years, let's say?
Well, first of all, it's too early for us to be able to analyze really the current movement in Iran. It's too early because of also internet blackout. We don't know what really is going on and what went on during all those days. I just look at the slogans, the major slogan was "Down with the dictator, down with Khamenei," for instance. That is that the entire regime was targeted by the demonstrators, and no specific other slogans such as secularization, democracy, and so on was chanted, but the major one that was chanted was "Down with the regime." Actually, when you say "down with Khamenei," it means down with the regime, which means that maybe people think that we cannot have any other demands from this regime, that this regime should go, that we have demonstrated, chanted slogans, demanded slogans for equality, for democracy, and so on, but this regime is not able to give us all this, so this regime should go. So it is a radicalization of comparing to previous movements on the one hand. On the other hand, women who were at the forefront, this is very important, women were at the forefront for the first time in Iran's history, at the forefront of women life freedom movement, were participating in the current movement, December January movement, but they were not at the forefront. So they were not chanting or they were not demanding their own rights. They were not saying we want gender equality. They said down with Khamenei. And everywhere, when women lose their independence in terms of demands, and in terms of also of militancy and activism, I think that they are, of course, they become a minority. They became a minority. I think that in the current movement, although we see a lot of women participating, and unfortunately, many women, as you know, have been killed. Many others are now imprisoned and injured. Their eyes, they shot into their eyes and all that. But no specific slogans were chanted, as far as I know, with regard to women's rights, for instance. So maybe we can say that this was a step back word comparing to women right freedom movement. But at the same time, it showed that the regime did not respond to any of their demands, and so it radicalized the entire population. And maybe another thing was that because at one point the media, both Western media and also social networks here, put forward Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, as the major alternative to the Islamic regime, some ethnic and religious minorities, such as Kurds, such as Baluchis, and even Turkmens, said in Iran, I mean, I was listening to their interviews and so on, they said, we do not accept to a leader such as Reza Pahlavi, because we were also discriminated against under his father's reign. And so this made a kind of many of these people not to identify themselves with some of the slogans that were chanted, because in Iran some people also chanted slogans in favor of Reza Pahlavi, and so this was to the detriment of the general movement. The movement, how did it start? It started with something that all Iranians are concerned with, that is important inflation, poverty. As you know, over at least 55 to 60% of the population live below poverty lines. These are official statistics. The rate of inflation is very high, unemployment is very high, and a very important corruption of the elite that is actually benefiting from all revenues. But when it comes to investment in education, in health, and so on, this has diminished. And then, of course, these brought a new social group that was not involved in previous social movements to the fore, and these were Bazaris. When it started in on December 28, it was the Bazaris, if you remember, who went on strike in Tehran and started demonstrating in the streets, and students very quickly joined in, and it was a very pacific but very important social movement, this time also with Bazaris, which showed that this regime has no social support, because it has already, it didn't have the support of the middle classes because they were in the streets against the regime already in 2009, and again in Jina Mahsa Amini movement, World Freedom movement. Popular classes were in the streets in December 2017, 2018, 2019. A lot of them had been killed in, at the time, over 137 cities in the country were involved in these popular social movements. So the only ones who still would back or support the regime were the Bazaris, and even them came to the streets and demonstrated, which showed that this regime has lost its popular support. It is illegitimate, and people want to topple the regime. Now, what happened was that the regime, to stay in power, actually shot and killed Iranians as if they were in a war with the enemy. And this is what happened. But anyways, what I want to say is that it is the regime's responsibility that this current movement was radicalized, and basically slogans that were chanted in women's rights freedom movement for the moment are not at the forefront anymore. But it is also because some women have obtained not in the legal system, but in the society, some freedoms, I should say. I think that women life freedom changed also patriarchy and patriarchal power within the families. That many women now are more, I should say, powerful than before. And this is something that would remain. I do not think that women would lose what they had obtained from Women Life Freedom Movement. But at the same time, for the moment, again, you're right to say, to actually acknowledge that for the moment, we have general demands, and that general demand is that this regime should go, but we don't know how. Anyways.
And so this was exactly my last question. How do you think it will proceed from here with all the costs, the human costs that people in Iran had to tolerate, as well as the fact that all these demands are still there? There is this dissatisfaction with the corruption, with the high-rocketing inflation, the value of the national currency is losing. The national currency is losing its value by the day, and not only the economic pressure is there, but also socially, politically, things are only getting worse. And now there is also the threat of war from the US and Israel. How do you think the situation will proceed from here, as my last question?
Well, I think that, again, the demands of the population will still remain. They're there. Also, I think that social movements do not disappear, although they might not succeed, but their impacts, their consequences are still there. And so I think that, for instance, when Life Freedom Movement, with its consequences and demands, are still there within the society, although they are not at the forefront for the moment. Of course, the economic situation of the country is really very bad, and it to the extent that even, as you know, middle classes are disappearing. They're impoverished. They have impoverished, and so this will continue because this regime is, for the moment, not able to respond positively to even economic demands of the population. Because, as I said, all revenues are being are benefiting and have benefited to a small group probably even less than 1% of the population who are in power or very close to power. And if you look at the budget, for instance, the state budget, 30% of the state budget is allocated to religious schools, theology schools, imams of Friday prayers, and so on and so forth, for instance, which is very controversial, and as you know, and people are very against. At the same time, important, budget allocations, of course, to military. The Revolutionary Guards, the Pastoran, for instance, benefited largely from oil revenues and also from these mafia networks, because they're very involved in these mafia type networks of selling unofficially, the oil and benefiting from the sanctions. International sanctions have not been against the regime. I have always said it. It has been against the society. It is the Iranian society that has been impoverished, but not the regime. They have always continued working on their nuclear facilities and ballistic missiles and so on and so forth. They have always continued also to fund and their proxies in the region and so on. So now we know that you're negotiating with the Americans because they have become so illegitimate within the country. They are very fragilized and weakened that they need to stay in power by giving concessions to the Americans. And we'll see what will happen. I have no idea. I don't know what Americans and Trump is really asking from Iran. I do believe that they are likely to give concessions on their nuclear program. For instance, they can suspend uranium enrichment within Iran for some years, for instance. But when it comes to ballistic missiles, I do not think that they will get concessions regarding their ballistic missiles as long as Israelis have all these military facilities that they have, and they can attack Iran and all these military facilities as they did in June 2025. But Trump has no interest in engaging himself in a new war with Iran. And we know that Saudis and Turks and also Pakistanis, Qataris, and everybody in the region have asked Trump not to engage in a war with Iran because it might have very important impacts on the entire region. So they are negotiating for the moment, and Trump is a businessman and is interested in, in the business rather than other things. But at the same time, his armada, as we say in French, everything is there, militarily speaking, to impress Iranians and also to threaten them. We don't know what will happen. Eventually, one scenario is to put Khamenei aside, trust him aside, and eventually work with probably a new man from the Revolutionary Guards or a new man from the establishment who is not against Americans, and they can eventually come up with some more moderate, quote unquote, solutions to avoid the war, but to also remain the Islamic regime in place, which is not at all a solution satisfactory to the entire Iranian population, to the majority, sorry, of the Iranian population. To say that, as far as I understand from outside of the country, the movement will continue. Especially this time, a lot of people have been massacred, more than under, Women Life Freedom movement and also previous movements. So the extent of murder and mass murder was so important and is so important. People are still working, as you know, people are still looking for their beloved ones who participated in the demonstrations. Have they been killed? Are they imprisoned? Where are they? And so on. So this is a very important trauma that is imposed on the Iranian society. And for the moment, people are, mourning and they are being traumatized. But I do not believe that they can go ahead and continue with this regime. There is a definite rupture between the Islamic regime and the majority of the population. Now, I have no idea of what's going on, whether Israelis, as you know, don't have do not want to engage in a war with Iran now. That we know, and this might be one of the reasons also why Trump started also negotiating with the Iranians, because Israelis said they are not ready for a war with Iran today. So these are all, regional and international factors to take into account when we talk about Iran. It's not just the Iranian population that are being, decisive with regard to the future, to their future, but it's also how important powers such as the United States or Israel or even regional powers will react and to the current situation. What I know nonetheless, unfortunately, is that no one in the region is for a democratic Iran. When we talk about democracy, Iranians are all alone. Why would Saudi Arabia, Qatar, even Turkey would like to see a democratic Iran at their borders? Of course not. Of course not.
Professor
And
Azadeh Kian, thank you very much for your time.
thank you, Mahtab.